In this presentation, we will analyze the reasons why Marie Antoinette had been decapitated and why we can consider the French Revolution the beginning of the end of the absolute monarchies all around Europe. Before going on with the presentation, remember that there is my book on sales. In the description of the presentation, you will find the link to get it. Please remember also to subscribe to the channel, give me your like, and share this video with your friend. This is gonna be very helpful for us. Thank you. Our story began in the 17th century, and I consider that exactly during the 17th century started or nourishes the conditions in order that brought the French monarchy, the French absolute monarchy to an end, and also all other absolute monarchy throughout Europe to an end. But first of all, analyze what an absolute monarchy actually is. An absolute monarchy is a monarchy where you have a monarch, you have a king or a queen with absolute power, which means that under his will they have the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary power. So the absolute monarch, they have people in their council, or they have people around them that suggest ideas, consultants, but finally all the decision is upon them. That's a great responsibility, but at the same time is the maximum expression of power. So you have the beginning of the end of the European absolute monarchy that, in my opinion, started in France in the 17th century. Obviously, nowadays you still have monarchy throughout Europe. Parliamentary monarchy, like the one you have, or constitutional monarchy, like the one you have in England, like the one you have in Spain, or maybe in Holland. All this modern monarchy, the monarch has a representative function. It's mainly a representative, but in terms of powers, their powers is extremely limited. The real powers of the nation with the monarchy is in the hands of the parliament, in the hands of the government that is being elected from the citizens. So, Louis XIII loved to hunt. It was the monarch in France, one of the most powerful men on earth, and his favorite hobby was hunting. And he had been the monarch between the year 1610 up to the year 1643. He was, when he died, his son, Louis XIV, took power from the year 1643 to the year 1750. And actually, Louis XIV was one of the longest monarchs in the history of monarchy. At the same time, it was, we can say that because if his reigns lasted so many years, that his quality of life was not bad at all. So you can say that during the 17th and the 18th century in Europe, the people, the noblemen, the kings were living quite well, much better than the rest of the citizens. That's a very simple conclusion that we can come to. Anyway, Louis XIII loved to hunt in an area that is called Versailles. Versailles is part of the UNESCO patrimony nowadays, and in the year 1623, Louis XIII built an hunting lodge. During the years 1630 and 1635, there was a remodelation, and they built a castle. But the construction of what we know nowadays as Versailles started in the year 1660 by his son Louis XIV. For Louis XIV, it was particularly important to build Versailles and to build a new palace in Versailles, able to host all the noblemen, all the court, because he wanted to achieve two goals. First, getting out of Paris. Actually, he wasn't living bad in Paris, because the King Palace, the court, was in the Louvre. The Louvre is a quite spectacular palace. However, during that age, the sanitary system was not really good and was not working well. So Paris was one of the characteristics of Paris was a very bad smell, a lot of rats, and also there were many poor people that could have turned in a danger for the king. So these were the reasons why Louis XIV decided to move to Versailles. And to build Versailles, it has been an enormous cost. At today's prices, we could talk about several billions dollars, maybe 200, maybe 300 billions, who knows. Actually, it's a complete city. It's not just a palace. It's a complete city because all the court was obliged to move from Paris to Versailles. And most of the court, they were not agree to leave Paris, but it was the will of the king. And remember, at that time in the history, the king was an absolute monarch with absolute power. So the reign of Louis XVI and his wife, the Queen Marie Antoinette, lasted since the year 1774 to the years 1789. And until the Bastille fall, until the revolution took the Bastille and limited their power. In the year 1792, arrived for them the guillotine, a very brutal way to end the absolute monarchy in France. But let's analyze what had been the reasons that brought France to the end of the absolute monarchies. So, first, but before analyzing the reason, we have to make a little explanation. The cost of the monarchy, the cost of Versailles, the cost of the wars, and the cost of the luxury that the monarchs and the noblemen surround themselves. Who paid that cost? Well, you will be surprised that the noblemen were almost tax exempt. They didn't pay any significant tax. The taxation and the cost of all the system was paid by normal people. So normal people, the citizens of Paris, the military, they were the one that they had to pay all that extremely costly structure. At that time, if somebody refused to pay taxes, it was quite brutal the way to make them pay. Usually, at the time of charging the people with their taxes, there were the army, there was the army that, and the people and the person that were in charge of taking the money, that was together with the army, and they were, I mean, if citizens were paying voluntarily the taxes, there were no problems, but when people weren't agreed to pay taxes, the taxes were taken with force, with violence. So you have to keep in mind this aspect. So all the cost of the monarchy was paid by normal people. How were the life conditions of normal people at that age? Well, actually, one of the reasons why Louis XIV decided to move the court from Paris to Versailles was that Paris was not as appealing as it is today. Living in Paris at that time, it was not so pleasant. There was the hygiene of the city was pretty low. The hygiene conditions were known practically. There weren't any condition of hygiene, and there were a lot of rats all around. The sanitary system wasn't built at that time, so all the biological waste was thrown in the street or into the Sena River. So you can imagine that it was not pleasant. The smell was terrible. So as the smell and the living condition were so low, also the quality of life of citizens was extremely low. But at the same time, they were obliged to pay the parties and all the luxury that you had in Versailles. So in one side you had the nobles that were surrounded by luxury, and the normal people that pay all this cost. For example, the cost of building Versailles itself. Nowadays you would say, okay, but it's a wonderful palace, a wonderful city. It's the UNESCO patrimony. I mean, it's extremely important. Yes, it's very important. Now, if you go to Paris, if you buy a ticket to visit it, it's extremely interesting. I suggest, if you go to Paris, visit Versailles also. So you can have an idea of how the French monarchy was living at that time. But at the same time, it was extremely unfair that the cost of it was on the shoulders of normal citizens, that they had to pay for that insane investment. And actually, it was an insane investment. So now we return to the reason. What are the reasons that brought absolute monarchies to an end? Well, first reason, bad management of public money. And you have an example of bad management of public money, for example, by the construction of Versailles. So, the bad management of public money was also explained for all the wars, because you didn't have only Versailles. Normal people had to pay also for wars. And usually soldiers were part of normal people, and they were obliged to go to wars. So most of the conflict, of the bellic conflict, most of the wars at that time were probably unnecessary, as they are today. And at that time, they were extremely costly, as they are today. And the war, if you go back in history, thousands of years, you will be surprised that probably most of the war had been completely avoidable. Very few wars were actually necessary. One of them, probably, World War II, was necessary. Probably was the only way to get rid of the nefastus Nazist and fascist regime. I agree with that. Sometimes the only way to arrive to a conclusion is through war. But most of the war through history had been completely unnecessary. So finally we arrive to the third reason, the one that origins and that caused the other two. The spark of that bad management of public money and the spark of wars. Well, human ego. The ego of human sometimes is bigger than themselves, and most of the time probably. Human ego is the cause and the origin of the end of absolute monarchy all throughout Europe. Also because this monarch believed to be empowered directly by God. Especially Louis, and I didn't mention that, but Louis XIV actually had a dispute. He was dueling with the Pope because he considered himself at the same level of the Pope. And the Pope actually didn't really trust Louis XIV because Louis XIV considered himself empowered directly by God. So it was in direct competition with the Pope himself. So ego, bad management of public money and wars had been the cause and the origin of the end of absolute monarchy all throughout Europe. Now I have, to conclude this presentation, I have a little question for you, just to think about our current times. What do you think? It has changed a lot the way we are run by government, comparing with the France of Louis XIV? We live in a new era, or maybe we are under similar condition in a certain ways. What do you think about that? But thanks for your attention, and please share this video with all your friends. It will be very helpful.